Jung. Formations of the Unconscious.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah, this one is going to be a fascinating one.
We are taking a look at Carl Jung
Yes?
and specifically some of his writings about the unconscious and the concept of rebirth.
Right, and this is something that I know you've been thinking about.
I have been thinking about it.
Because you sent in some excerpts from Formaciones de lo Inconsciente.
I did, yeah.
So you're clearly interested in this.
I am very interested in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jung in general, I mean, he's got such a unique perspective on things.
I think that's what's so captivating about him is that he's willing to go to these mysterious depths of the human psyche, you know?
Yeah.
To explore beyond just sort of our everyday, thoughts and feelings and really investigate what's going on in the unconscious.
Yeah, and how that's even reflected in art, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he talks about this idea of the psychological and visionary modes of artistic creation.
Right.
So is he saying like there are two types of artists or two ways to approach art?
Yeah.
Or like, I kind of feel like this distinction could apply to a lot more than just art.
Well, it's a fascinating distinction.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it in the psychological mode, the artist is drawing inspiration from their personal experiences, their emotions, things that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
But in the visionary mode, they're tapping into something much deeper, something ancient and universal.
Okay.
Almost like a primordial wellspring of images and symbols that goes beyond any one individual's experience.
Wow.
And Jung argued that these visions, even though they might seem strange or unsettling to us,
Right.
actually carry a lot of psychological weight.
That's a cool idea. The artist is like a conduit for something bigger than themselves.
Right.
Yeah. Like they're tapping into some collective well of creativity or something.
Absolutely. And Jung actually used the contrast between Faust Part 1 and Part 2 to kind of illustrate this.
Oh, interesting.
Where, Part 1 is very much rooted in Faust's personal struggles. But when you get to Part 2, it's like Goethe is channeling something so ancient and vast. It's exploring these themes of redemption.
Right.
The feminine principle, this search for wholeness.
Okay.
And I think that's what Jung was getting at, is these powerful forces that can be almost overwhelming to the human psyche.
Okay, so we're already talking about powerful forces, potentially overwhelming experiences, and then you mentioned rebirth earlier.
Right.
Which feels very connected to that.
Yeah.
So what exactly did Jung mean by rebirth? Because I feel like that's one of those words that can mean so many different things to different people.
You're absolutely right. It's a very loaded term.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jung identified 5 distinct forms of rebirth.
5.
There's reincarnation, where the soul is reborn into a new body after death.
Okay.
There's rebirth in the sense of resurrection, often tied to religious beliefs.
Gotcha.
There's reincarnation with the possibility of remembrance of previous lives, so a continuous kind of soul journey.
Okay.
Rebirth in a figurative sense as renovation,
Okay.
a kind of renewal or fresh start within your current life. And then rebirth in the strict sense, so those profound psychological transformations that can happen within a lifetime.
Okay, so we've got like 5 different flavors of rebirth here.
We do.
But I'm guessing Jung wasn't too concerned with proving or disproving reincarnation.
Right.
That feels like a whole other deep dive.
Exactly. Jung was more interested in the psychological experience of rebirth, regardless of your personal beliefs about the afterlife.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he's saying, it doesn't even matter if it's literally true or not.
Right.
What matters is that humans keep coming back to this idea of rebirth.
I love that.
So he was really interested in that. And for him, rebirth represented this fundamental human concept.
Okay.
Something deeply embedded in our collective psyche.
I loved it focusing on the psychological reality of it.
Yeah.
Instead of getting lost in the weeds of, is this real or not?
Exactly.
But what does he mean by a fundamental human concept?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
The concept of rebirth in various forms pops up across cultures throughout history.
Right.
For Jung, this suggested that there was a shared psychic phenomenon at play.
Okay.
And particularly, he thought this was related to archetypes.
Okay.
And these archetypes are like these universal, unconscious patterns that influence how we see the world.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to those things that are beyond our immediate senses, the things we can't quite explain.
But we all have this innate understanding of what rebirth means.
Right.
Even if we've never experienced it literally ourselves.
And not only that, but we keep telling stories about it.
Yeah.
We keep coming up with different versions of it.
Okay, so Jung sees those widespread beliefs in rebirth as evidence of a powerful archetype.
Exactly.
Okay. But what did he think that actual experience of transformation felt like.
Yeah, well, he categorized these transformative experiences in two primary ways.
Yep.
Transcendence of life
Okay.
and personal transformation.
Okay, two categories. What's the difference? Because they both sound pretty transformative to me.
They do. Think of transcendence of life as those moments where you feel connected to something much bigger than yourself.
Okay.
And this is often accompanied by, a sense of awe and wonder.
Right.
One powerful example that Jung talks about is Nietzsche's midday vision, where he encounters the god Dionysus.
Okay.
Right. And this idea actually links back to ancient mystery cults.
Oh, wow.
This idea of this direct encounter with the divine.
Okay, so a divine encounter definitely sounds transcendent.
Right.
What about personal transformation? What does that look and feel like?
So this category is more about profound shifts in your personality and your identity.
Okay.
And of course, Jung, being Jung, he broke this down even further.
Of course he did.
Into diminution of personality and inflation of personality.
Diminution, inflation. That sounds intense.
It does.
What does that look like in real life? Give me an example.
Well, diminution often involves this feeling of a loss of energy.
Okay.
A fragmentation of your sense of self.
Gotcha.
It can feel like a descent into darkness. Okay.
Or some cultures might describe it as like a soul loss.
So like a breakdown, almost like the foundation of who you thought you were is kind of crumbling.
In a sense, yes. And crucially, it can be a necessary stage in the transformation process.
Okay.
Right? Like you have to let go of these old, outdated parts of yourself to make way for something new.
Okay.
On the other hand, you have inflation.
Okay.
And this is where you become dominated by a specific archetype or complex.
Okay.
And you start to lose touch with your true self.
So it's almost like you get so caught up in an idea of yourself,
Right.
a role that you're playing, that you kind of lose sight of who you really are underneath.
Exactly. And a common example of this is identifying too strongly with your persona.
Right.
That mask that we present to the world.
Right.
It's easy to get so caught up in maintaining that facade
Yeah.
that we lose sight of the authentic self underneath.
This is all fascinating, but I need like a more concrete example to really get it.
Okay.
Is there a story or a figure that Jung used to illustrate this process of transformation? This is where the story of Khidr comes in.
Khidr, fill me in. Who is that?
So Khidr, also known as the Green One, is a central figure in Islamic mysticism,
Okay.
particularly in the Quran's 18th surah, the Cave.
Okay.
And Jung interpreted this story as an allegory for rebirth.
Oh, wow.
And it's about Moses and his servant.
Okay.
And they represent the conscious and unconscious aspects of a person
Okay.
going on this journey to the confluence of two seas,
Okay.
which is this symbolic space representing a kind of crossroads or transition.
Okay.
And along the way, they lose their fish, which symbolizes their life source.
Oh.
And they encounter this mysterious figure, Khidr, who becomes their guide.
Okay. So we've got a lost fish, a mysterious guide, a journey to a symbolic crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like a trip into the unconscious to me.
Right, and that lost fish actually gets reborn in the sea.
Okay.
So it represents this forgotten unconscious source of renewal that's within us.
Okay.
And the entire journey is about reconnecting with that source. And the events that happen along the way, they highlight just how paradoxical transformation can be.
It's not a straight line.
No, it's about confronting your shadow, accepting the unknown,
Right.
surrendering to a kind of wisdom that logic can't always grasp.
The Khidr story is like such a powerful image for how challenging and winding that path of transformation can be.
It is.
But how do we access these experiences in our own lives? Like, is there a method? Is there something specific that Jung recommended?
Yeah, Jung developed two key concepts: active imagination
Okay.
and the mandala.
Active imagination, the mandala, these sound right up our alley.
They do.
Tell me more.
Well, active imagination is about intentionally entering a dialogue with your unconscious.
Okay.
It's about creating that inner space where the figures, the symbols, even the stories that live in your unconscious
Right.
can come alive and speak to you directly.
So it's about letting your unconscious take the stage, so to speak?
Exactly.
But what does that look like in practice? Do you just sit down, close your eyes, and wait for the show to start?
Well, it can be that simple, but often it takes a little more intention.
Okay.
Jung talked about the importance of creating a ritual around it.
Okay.
Finding a time and place where you can be quiet and undisturbed.
Right.
Maybe lighting a candle, listening to some calming music.
Okay.
Whatever helps you get into that contemplative space.
So set the stage a little bit.
Yes. And then think about a dream you had.
Okay.
An image that's stuck with you. A recurring feeling, something from your unconscious that feels significant.
Okay, so you pick your starting point,
Exactly.
and then what do you just stare at that image in your mind's eye and just wait for something to happen?
You can, but the real magic happens when you actively engage with whatever emerges.
Okay.
Talk to the figures that you encounter. Ask them questions.
Oh, wow.
Explore the landscape of your imagination as if it were a physical place.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to get curious.
So it's not about being a passive observer,
No.
but an active participant in the world that your unconscious is revealing.
Exactly. Imagine yourself stepping into that dreamscape, that symbolic world.
Wow.
It's like becoming a character in your own inner movie.
That's amazing.
Interacting with the other characters, asking questions, following the threads of the story wherever they lead.
That sounds incredibly powerful, but also, honestly, a little scary.
Yeah,
What if you go too deep?
sure.
What if you lose yourself in there?
It's a valid fear. The unconscious is vast and mysterious, and it's understandable to feel a bit apprehensive about exploring those depths.
Yeah.
That's why Jung emphasized the importance of maintaining a conscious observer throughout the process.
So it's about finding that balance again?
Yes,
Opening yourself to the unconscious without getting completely swept away?
exactly. It's like scuba diving.
Okay.
You have your equipment,
Yeah.
training your buddy to help you navigate safely.
Gotcha.
In active imagination, your conscious mind is your scuba gear.
I love that analogy.
It helps you explore the depths while still being able to resurface when you need to.
And what about mandalas? How do they help us tap into this unconscious wisdom?
So mandalas are fascinating.
Yeah.
Think of them as messages from your unconscious,
Okay.
little glimpses into your soul's blueprint.
Okay.
They can pop up in your dreams.
Yeah.
You might find yourself doodling them in the margins of your notebook,
Right.
or you might feel drawn to create them intentionally.
So they can either emerge spontaneously
Right.
or we can choose to create them.
Exactly. And in a way, even when we create them intentionally,
Yeah.
we're still tapping into that unconscious flow.
Right.
Jung believed that the mandala symbolizes wholeness,
Okay.
that integration of our conscious and unconscious aspects that we're always striving for.
So the mandala is like a visual representation of that inner unity we're seeking,
Yes.
that sense of coming home to ourselves.
And creating mandalas can be a powerful form of active imagination in itself.
Okay.
You're giving your unconscious a paintbrush and letting it express itself through colors and shapes.
Right.
And just like in active imagination, you don't need to be a master artist to do this.
Right.
The process itself is the medicine.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to think that we have these tools within us,
We do.
these methods of communicating with the deepest parts of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we can all do.
We all have that capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like you need to be a trained psychologist or an artist or anything.
You don't have to be an expert
Right.
to access this.
It's so cool.
It is.
Yeah. I'm reminded of that case study that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
The patient who created these incredible mandalas.
Yes.
I'm dying to hear more about her journey.
Oh, it's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
This particular patient, through her active imagination and the mandalas that she created, gave us this incredibly rich picture
Yeah.
of what that process of individuation, of integrating the unconscious can actually look like in someone's life.
Right. And she wasn't even aware of like the Jungian concepts.
That's what's so fascinating.
Right.
Is that this particular patient had no prior knowledge of Jungian psychology,
Yeah.
of alchemy, of Eastern traditions,
Right.
all of these different systems of thought that place a lot of importance on symbols.
Right.
And yet the symbols that emerged in her mandalas were strikingly similar
Wow.
to what you would find in these ancient traditions.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really speaks to that idea that these archetypes,
They're universal.
Yeah.
They're speaking to something.
these symbols are not just personal, but there's something much larger than us.
Exactly.
Something woven into the fabric of human experience.
Exactly. And it highlights just how powerful the unconscious can be.
Right.
How it can guide us towards wholeness, towards a deeper understanding of ourselves, even if we don't consciously understand the language that it's speaking.
So I'm ready to dive into the specifics of her case.
Okay,
I want to know what symbols emerged, what her process looked like,
let's do it.
and most importantly, what we can learn from her journey.
Absolutely.
So we left off talking about how this patient used mandalas
Yes.
as a way to sort of illustrate her process of individuation.
Right. And her own personal transformation.
Right. So let's dive deeper into this idea of active imagination, because I think for a lot of people, it can still feel a little mysterious.
Sure.
Like, how do you actually do it?
Right.
What does it look like to have a conversation with your unconscious?
Well, it really is a process of going inward
Okay.
of consciously choosing to engage with your unconscious.
Okay.
And it's about creating that inner space where those figures, those symbols, even the stories that live in your unconscious
Right.
can come alive and speak to you directly.
Okay, so you're basically setting the stage for your unconscious to kind of take the stage, so to speak.
Exactly.
And what does that look like in practice?
Right.
Do you sit down, close your eyes, and wait for the show to start?
Well, it can be that simple, but often it takes a little bit more intention. Jung talked about the importance of creating a kind of ritual around it.
Right.
You know, finding a time and a place where you can be quiet and undisturbed.
Right.
Maybe lighting a candle, listening to some calming music.
Okay.
Whatever helps you get into that contemplative space.
So set the stage a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then from there, you think about a dream you had.
Okay.
An image that's stuck with you. A recurring feeling something from your unconscious that feels significant.
Okay, so you pick your starting point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you just see what happens.
But what do you just stare at that image in your mind's eye?
Not necessarily,
Oh, yeah.
because the real magic happens when you start to actively engage with whatever emerges.
Okay.
Talk to the figures you encounter.
Oh, wow.
Ask them questions. Explore the landscape of your imagination as if it were a physical place.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to get curious.
So it's not about just being a passive observer,
No.
but actually like an active participant
Exactly.
in the world that your unconscious is revealing.
Imagine yourself stepping into that dreamscape, that symbolic world.
Wow.
It's like you become a character in your own inner movie.
Oh, wow.
Interacting with the other characters.
Right.
Asking questions.
Yeah.
Following the threads of the story wherever they lead.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But also, honestly, a little scary.
Sure.
Like, what if you go too deep?
Yeah.
What if you lose yourself in there?
It's a valid fear. I mean, the unconscious is vast and mysterious.
Right.
And it's understandable to feel a bit apprehensive about exploring those depths.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why Jung emphasized the importance of maintaining a conscious observer throughout the process.
So it's about finding that balance again.
Yes.
Of opening yourself up to the unconscious without getting totally swept away.
Exactly. It's like scuba diving.
Okay.
You have your equipment.
Yeah.
You're training your buddy to help you navigate safely.
Right.
In active imagination, your conscious mind is your scuba gear.
Yeah.
It helps you to explore the depths while still being able to resurface when you need to.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And what about mandalas?
Yeah.
How do they fit into this? Because we touched on them a little bit earlier.
Right.
But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about how they can help us tap into this unconscious wisdom.
Well, you know, mandalas are fascinating because they're often these spontaneous expressions of the self.
Okay.
Like these little glimpses into your soul's blueprint.
Okay.
They can pop up in your dreams.
Right.
You might find yourself doodling them in the margins of your notebook.
Right, like without even realizing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or you might feel drawn to create them intentionally.
So they can either emerge spontaneously or we can kind of consciously choose to create them.
Exactly. And in a way, even when we create them intentionally,
Yeah.
we're still tapping into that unconscious flow.
Right, like it's still coming from that same source.
Exactly. And Jung believed that the mandala symbolizes wholeness, that integration of our conscious and unconscious aspects that we're always striving for.
So the mandala is almost like a visual representation of that inner unity.
Yes.
We're seeking that sense of coming home to ourselves.
And creating mandalas can actually be a powerful form of active imagination in itself.
Okay, how so?
Because you're literally giving your unconscious a paintbrush
Okay.
and letting it express itself through colors and shapes and patterns.
Right, and you don't have to overthink it.
You don't.
You're just letting it flow.
Exactly. And just like an active imagination, you don't need to be a master artist to do this.
Right, it's not about the product.
Exactly.
It's about the process.
The process itself is the medicine.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that we all have these tools within us,
We do.
these methods of communicating with these deepest parts of ourselves.
And we all have that capacity.
And it's not like you need to be a trained psychologist.
You don't have to be an expert to
Oh.
access this.
That's so cool.
It is.
So through this process of active imagination of working with mandalas, we're essentially learning to speak the language of our unconscious.
Exactly.
We're learning to understand those symbols, those archetypes.
Yes. And the more we practice listening to our unconscious, the more fluent we become in that symbolic language.
It's like we're learning to understand the whispers of our own soul.
That's beautifully put.
So powerful.
It is.
And I imagine it's not always easy.
It's not always easy to decipher those whispers,
Right.
those symbolic messages.
But when you do,
Yes.
it can be incredibly illuminating.
It can be like turning on a light in a previously dark room.
And speaking of illuminating,
Yes.
I'm reminded of that case study that you mentioned
Right.
with the patient who created those incredible mandalas.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about her journey, if you're open to sharing.
I'm happy to share. It's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
You know, this particular patient, through her active imagination and the mandalas that she created, gave us this incredibly rich picture of what that process of individuation,
Right.
of integrating the unconscious can actually look like.
And what's so cool about it is that she wasn't even aware of Jungian psychology.
That's what's so fascinating, is that this particular patient had no prior knowledge of Jungian psychology,
Right.
of alchemy, of Eastern traditions,
Right.
all of these different systems of thought that place a lot of importance on symbols.
Right.
And yet the symbols that emerged in her mandalas were strikingly similar
Wow.
to what you would find in these ancient traditions.
That's incredible.
It's like she was tapping into this universal language of the soul.
It really speaks to that idea that these archetypes, these symbols, they're not just personal.
They're universal.
Yeah.
They're speaking to something.
There's something much larger than us,
Yeah.
like woven into the fabric of human experience.
Exactly. And it highlights just how powerful the unconscious can be.
Right.
How it can guide us towards wholeness, towards a deeper understanding of ourselves, even if we don't consciously understand the language that it's speaking.
So I'm ready to dive into the specifics of her case.
Okay.
I want to know what symbols emerged, what her process looked like,
Let's do it.
and most importantly, what we can learn from her journey.
Absolutely.
So where did this patient's journey begin? What was she exploring in those early mandalas?
Well, what's interesting is that she started by drawing herself trapped inside a rock,
Oh, wow.
which feels very symbolic.
Yeah, like she felt stuck,
Right.
trapped by her own unconscious patterns.
Yeah.
I think we can all relate to that feeling.
Absolutely. And then in a later mandala, she depicts this golden sphere emerging from that same rock,
Okay.
struck by a bolt of lightning.
Wow.
Now, in Jungian terms, the sphere is often associated with the self,
Right.
while the lightning represents this sudden burst of insight, this breakthrough.
So it's like the self, that core of who she truly was always there,
Right.
hidden within the rock of her unconscious,
Exactly.
just waiting for that lightning bolt of awareness to kind of set it free.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about the unconscious. It's not just this repository of, dark or unwanted material,
Right.
but it's also a source of immense potential,
Yeah.
of healing, of wholeness.
So it's not about getting rid of the rock.
Yeah,
It's about recognizing that there's something precious inside it,
exactly.
something worth fighting for.
It's about integration, not annihilation.
I love that.
And as she continued to work, creating more and more mandalas, she starts incorporating other symbols that point towards this process of integration.
Okay, like what?
Well, there were snakes, which Jung often saw as representing transformation.
Okay.
That shedding of the skin symbolizing renewal and rebirth.
Snakes are so often linked to those cyclical processes in nature, right?
Exactly.
Like death and rebirth, that constant shedding and renewal that happens all around us.
Right.
And within us, too.
Exactly. And then there were birds, which Jung often saw as representing a kind of transcendence,
Okay.
a rising above the limitations of the ego.
Gotcha.
And stars, which for Jung symbolized a connection to something much larger than ourselves, the sense of belonging to the cosmos.
It's like with each symbol, she was expanding her awareness,
Yes.
connecting to these different layers of her being.
Exactly.
From the depths of her unconscious to like her place in this grand scheme of things.
That's beautifully put, and I think that's a really powerful takeaway from her
Yeah.
journey and from Jung's work in general.
Yeah.
This process of individuation, of becoming who we truly are,
Yeah.
is not just about, analyzing our dreams or digging through our past traumas.
Right.
Those can be important parts of the process. It's also about how we connect to the world around us,
Right.
to the universe as a whole.
So it's not just about what's going on inside our heads, but how we connect outward as well.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those moments of connection, those times when we feel a sense of awe and wonder,
Right.
whether that's through nature or art or relationships or even just a quiet moment of reflection.
Right.
Those experiences can be like signposts on the path to wholeness.
It's like those moments where you feel truly alive,
Yeah.
truly connected to something larger than yourself.
Exactly.
And they can be so fleeting, but they leave a mark.
They do.
They remind us that there's more to life than just our, everyday worries and routines.
Exactly. And I think the more we pay attention to those moments,
Yeah.
the more we cultivate that sense of wonder and curiosity about the world,
Right.
the more those deeper parts of ourselves, those
Yeah.
unconscious forces can emerge and guide us.
This whole conversation has been incredibly enriching. And it makes me wonder, where do we go from here?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because these are fascinating ideas.
They are.
But they can be a little complex.
Yeah.
So how do we take these Jungian concepts and actually integrate them into our everyday lives?
Well, I think even just being open to these ideas,
Right.
engaging with them through conversations like this
Yeah.
is a really powerful first step. And you've already started that process
That's
just by diving into Jung's work and bringing these excerpts to our attention today.
sometimes I think the first step is just acknowledging that there's a whole other world within us.
Yes.
Waiting to be explored. And it's a bit like that moment in the Kid Your story.
Right.
When Moses realizes that there's more to this journey than meets the eye.
Right.
That sometimes we need to surrender to the unknown,
Yes.
to the guidance of something wiser than our conscious minds.
That's beautifully said, and I think it speaks to the heart of what Jung was trying to convey.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating that sense of curiosity, that willingness to question our assumptions, and that trust in the wisdom that resides within each of us,
Right.
even if it speaks a language that we don't always understand.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to explore these ideas with you today.
Likewise.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Jung's work,
We've only just begun to dive in.
but it's definitely sparked a desire in me to keep digging,
Yes.
to keep exploring those hidden depths.
The journey never really ends, does it?
I don't think so.
And that's part of the beauty of it. There's always more to discover, more to understand, more to integrate.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to resurface from this deep dive.
Okay.
But I have a feeling this conversation will stay with me
Me too.
and with our listeners for a long time to come.
I think so.
So thank you so much for joining me on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners out there, keep asking those big questions. And remember, the unconscious is always speaking,
Always.
if we know how to listen.